Welcome back everyone, I'm Nick, this is Swiftful Thinking, and this might be the hardest video in this entire series. And it's not technically hard because the actual code is hard, but because we have to do a little bit of math, and I know for some reason a lot of people don't like to do math even though programming is a lot of logic. But I'm going to walk you guys through it, of course. We're going to create a very basic graph so that when a user goes to the detail view, they can see a chart with the price data for that coin for the past 7 days. We already have that data downloaded in our coin models. We just need to convert that data basically to some sort of X and Y axis so that we can chart all of the price data. And it's a little complicated, but again, we'll walk you guys through it. I'm pretty excited about the end state of this chart because it looks really cool. We're gonna add some shadows, we're gonna add some formatting to make it look perfect in our theme. And I think it's gonna add a really nice user experience to our final product.
All right, welcome back everyone. I am back in our Xcode project, of course. And in the last video, we started setting up our detail views. So if I click on one of these coins, it goes to this detail view. And we have some really cool data that's pulling in now. We have our original data as well as an additional API call that we're making to get some extra data here. And it is all looking great. And in this video, we're going to finish up this screen with some additional, we're going to put a chart in the top section, as well as we're going to start with just putting the coin's image in the navigation bar up here, just to give it a little bit of a better UI effect. So I am going to go jump into our detail view here, and let's start working in the body section here. So I'm going to X out of the simulator quick. All right, and underneath the navigation title, let's add a .toolbar, because remember, Apple wants us to use the toolbar now instead of the navigation items. So within the toolbar, we can add a toolbar item. So I'm going to actually get rid of this completion here and just open the brackets. It looks a little cleaner. And let's add a toolbar item. Open the parentheses, and we're going to use the placement and content. And in the placement, we can add, the auto-completion doesn't work here all the time. I'm not really sure why. I think it's kind of like a compiler error. But we can add the navigation bar trailing here. Let me click enter on the content. And now you can see this turns purple, so it is correct. And just for a second, let's put text saying hello, just to see where it is. So it pops up in the top right corner. And let's start out here with a very simple text. We'll say text. We'll access the vm.coin.symbol, and we'll call .uppercased. Let's make it a font of headline, and let's give it a foreground color of color.theme.secondary text. I hope you guys are realizing that every time we use a color, we are using our theme color. We're doing that on purpose. And let's actually put that, let's hold the command button, click on the text, and put it into a H-stack. And then on the right of that, let's add a coin image view. We need to pass in our coin, so it's going to be vm.coin, and that should pop up here. And lastly, obviously it's too big, so let's give it a frame with a width of 25, a height of 25. We don't need the alignment. I think that looks a little bit better in the top right corner. Alright, so let's actually cut this H stack. Let's scroll down to our extension. Let's create a private var. Let's call this navigation bar trailing items. Make it conform to some view, open the brackets, and let's paste in our H stack. Then let's just take that component and just paste in our navigation bar trailing items here. Click resume, make sure it is still working. So we should now get that image popping up here. And I'm going to run that on simulator quick just to make sure it does look good before we move on. And let me click on a random one. And we have the image in the top right corner. I think it looks pretty good with the gray text, and we have the icon, which looks like a pretty good size. Let's check one or two other ones. Uniswap. That looks pretty good to me. I think it's really cool because the navigation bar stays at the top. So when we scroll down, we have the title goes into the top bar, and we can still see the icon the whole time, which is pretty which I think is a pretty good user experience. One more, Solana, and that looks pretty awesome as well. All right, let's move on and let's figure out what we're going to do with this chart section. I think this is going to make our app look really awesome. All right, so there's going to actually be a lot of logic in this chart, and because of that, I want to make it its own view. So let's right click on the views here in our details folder and create a new file, and let's call it, and it'll be a SwiftUI view, and let's call this chart view. Go ahead and click create. And there's going to be a little bit of math we're going to have to do here. I'm going to walk you guys through it. All right, so let's start building out this chart here. The very basics of it is that we are going to be drawing a line that's going to mimic a line chart. And when we are on an iPhone, we can draw a path, and it's based on a coordinate system. And the coordinate system starts at 0, 0 on the top left, and the max Y and the max X is all the way in the bottom right. So it's kind of like a chart, but it's flipped upside down. So we need to basically just figure out where we want to draw the line on our screen. I'm going to walk you guys through it now, but before we even get to drawing the line, of course, we need some data that we can put into our chart. So if you guys remember, in our coin model, at the bottom of our coin model, we included a sparkline in 7D. It's actually given us an array called price, and it's an array of double. And I have the response up here just to show you guys. And as you can see here, this price array is an array of double, and it's an array of prices for each coin. And if I look at this one is Bitcoin here, and we have the prices of like 55,000. But if I go down to the next one, this is Ethereum, the prices are 30, this is 3,000 down here. So the first problem we're going to have is that we need to create our chart to be dynamic so that each chart has a different y-axis, because these prices need a different y-axis than the Bitcoin prices, because obviously they're different prices. So going back into our code, let's jump back into the chart view. And the first thing we're going to need is data for our chart, of course. So let's create a data at the top. Let's say let data of type array of double. Let's create a custom init. And in our init, let's pass in a coin of type coin model. And let's set up our data from the coin. So we'll say data equals the coin dot sparkline in 7D dot price. That's the array we just looked at, and it's optional, so if we don't have it, let's just make a blank array just in case we don't have any data. And let's pass that into our preview down here by just calling dev.coin. So we should have the data loaded in our dev.coin. Let me just double check. Jump into the coin, and we have our sparkline in 7D. So we're going to get all of this data to put into our chart now. All right. First thing we're going to do is create a path, open the brackets, and it'll be for path in. And inside this brackets, we can then start drawing a path. And let's start by getting the x coordinate for each coin in the path. And in here, let's first say for index in data.indices, and then we'll open the brackets. So we're going to loop on the data in here. So this is going to loop on all the data. We're looping on the indices. So this is going to be the index. So it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not going to be the actual price. So here, let's say let x position. We'll set it equal to the UI screen.main.bounds.width. This is the total width of the screen. We're going to divide it by a CG float of the data.count. So the data.count is normally an integer. We're just converting it to a CG float. So this is going to give us just the standard increment. So for example, if I had a screen with a width of 300 points and we had 100 items in our data array, if we divided 300 by 100, it would mean each item would have an x of 3 additional points. So we're going to take that number and just multiply it by the index plus 1. And we're doing plus 1 because the index starts at 0, but the count starts at 1. So we're doing CG float of the index plus 1. All right, and just to write that out, so if we had the index was 0, the first data point, it would be 0 plus 1, so it would be 1 times multiplying it times the width divided by the count, which would be our 3 here. So that would be times 3, and that would equal an x of 3. If we did the second item, the item at index number 1, that would be 1 plus 1 is 2 times 3 equals 6, and it would be 3 times 3 equals 9, and it will keep going until our final point, which would be 99 plus 1, so 100 times 3, and that would equal 300. So our x would go all the way from 3 to 300. All right, so let's put this on the screen quick. We're first going to say if index is equal to 0. So if we're on the first loop, let's move the pointer to where we want to start. So we'll say path.move. We're going to go to CG point, and we're just going to put the x and the y as 0 for now. So we'll move it to 0.00, which is in the top left. And then we just want to draw a line to each x position. So we'll say path.addLine to CG point. And the x position will be our x position, and the y will just keep 0 for a second. So that should just draw a line straight across our screen. And we can't see it right now because the line is so thin. So on this whole path here, let's just add a stroke with a style. We'll do color.blue, and let's give it a stroke style. Let's use the completion down here. We'll give it a line width of 10 just for now. Line cap of round, and a line join of round. And let's delete the rest of these because we don't need them. So if we resume the canvas, we should now see a straight line across the screen. So each position is being drawn from left to right across the screen, and it's going all the way across the screen because the width we're basing it on is the entire width of the screen. But of course, this width of the screen isn't very dynamic, right? If we had the chart and we wanted to maybe add some padding around the chart so it didn't go all the way to the edges, that would throw off all of our data points because this is being based on drawing a chart as wide as the screen. So we really want to instead base this on the actual size of our chart. So if we were to change the size of our chart, if we made it shorter than the width, we would want this to be dynamic as well. So what we're going to do is embed the path in a geometry reader. So let's hold the command button and click on path here. And I'm going to embed it in a H stack. And then I'm just going to change the wording of the H stack to geometry reader. And I'm going to put for geometry in. So this is going to put our view inside a geometry reader, and that's going to then give us the geometry of the chart that we are inside. So instead of using the entire width of the screen, let's just use the entire width of the geometry. So here we're going to say instead geometry.size.width. So right now it's going to look the exact same because the geometry is the entire size of the screen. But if I were to instead add a frame on this, and I'll give it a frame with a width of maybe 200, we'll see that it now updates to 200. It doesn't stay the entire width of the screen. I'm not going to do that just yet. I just wanted to show you guys why we're adding in the geometry reader so that our chart can be dynamic. So we have our X position, and now we just need our Y position. And this is where the tricky math starts to come in because as I showed you guys in our, let's go to our dev.coin, the positions are actually based on prices. So 53,000, 53,500, and those are obviously not coordinates on our screen. So we first need to convert those into basically Y coordinates within our graph. So when we initialize our chart view, let's actually first find the minimum Y and the maximum Y that we need in our graph. So let's say up here, let max Y of type double, and we'll say let min Y of type double. And in our initializer, let's set up the Y-axis. So the max Y is going to be the highest price in our data array, and the min Y will be obviously the lowest price. So we'll say max Y, we'll set it equal to the data, which we just set up in this line. So now we have an array of double to use. So we'll call data.max. And this is optional because there's a chance that there is no items in this array. So we'll just give it a default value of 0 if there is no max, but there always will be, we know. Let's also say min y, and we'll set it equal to data.min, otherwise 0. Alright, so for example, if we had like those Bitcoin numbers, the max might be like 60,000 and the minimum might be 50,000. Alright, so when we are getting the Y position, we first need to convert it into a range between 50 and 60,000. So we're going to first say let Y axis equal, and we're just going to call the max Y minus the min Y. So if our minimum was 50 and our maximum was 60, that would mean there's 10,000 possible data points between these two. So the basis of our y-axis will be 10,000. So this is our max, this is our min. This y-axis is basically going to be 60,000 minus 50,000, and it will equal 10,000. This will be our y-axis here. And then we want to find, let's say we have a point with maybe 52,000. This will be our data point that we're trying to find for each loop here. So what we're going to do is find the distance between the data point and the bottom. So we'll say 52,000 minus 50,000. So that will give us 2,000. So it's 2,000 off the bottom. And we know the maximum distance between the bottom and the top is 10,000. So we could divide that 2,000 by 10,000, and that would give us 20%. So we would then know that this data point needs to be 20% off of the bottom of our screen. So let's first find that. We'll say let y position equals, and we'll get the data point first. We'll say data at the index with the square brackets, and we'll subtract the min y. Put that in parentheses because that's the first thing we need to do. And then we need to divide it by that 10,000, so the whole y-axis. So we'll say divided by y-axis. That's going to give us 20%. So now we know we need to be 20% off of the bottom, but the last thing we need to know is the actual height of the graph. So just like in the x position, we needed the geometry.width, here we need the geometry.height, because we're going to be 20% of the actual height of the graph. So we'll multiply this times geometry.size.height. And we need to actually make this a CG float. So let's put this division here inside an extra set of parentheses, and let's make it a CG float. All right, let's then take the Y position and let's add a line. Let's click resume. See what we got. And our chart looks like it's starting to come together. And now I want to show you guys that if I look at the data that we have on our dev.coin, the first item, the top couple items in our array is 54,000, 53,000, 53,000. And if I scroll down to the bottom, the final items here are 57,000, 57,000. So it went up over this time. But if I look at my chart, the price clearly went down. And that's because the coordinate system of the iPhone is actually in reverse, where 0.0 is at the top and 1,000 is at the bottom. So even though our data prices are going up, our chart looks like it's going down. So we need to inverse the y-axis here. So all we're going to do is take our percentage here and subtract it from the number 1. So if our percentage is actually 20%, we're going to make it 1 minus 20%, so 80%. And it will just give us the opposite. So let's put it in parentheses. We'll do 1 minus CG float here. And our chart should then inverse, and it looks better. The last thing I see is that our starting point is 0, 0. It doesn't really make any sense anymore. So let's make our starting point just the first X position and Y position. And that should give us a much better chart. Alright, I know it was a little confusing, but we do have our chart drawing now. So I'm going to delete some of these comments and let's start moving on with the rest of this video. The first thing I want to do is change up this stroke here because the blue obviously doesn't match our awesome theme. So this stroke, let's make it 2 so it's a little bit thinner. And this color, let's make it a variable at the top of our screen. So let's say let line color of type color. So I want the color to change whether or not the line went up or down. So let's first in our init, let's say let price change equals, and let's take the last coordinate and subtract it from the first coordinate. So we'll say in parentheses, let's do data.last, and it's optional, so we'll do otherwise 0. And then we'll subtract it from data.first, otherwise 0. So this is going to take the final point minus the first point, and it will be the amount the price has changed. And then below this, all we'll say is line color equals, and we'll say if the price change is greater than 0, question mark. If it's greater than 0, let's use color.theme.green. Otherwise, color.theme.red. All right, so if it was positive, we're going to use the green color. If it was negative, it would be the red color. So right now, this is clearly a positive graph. So hopefully this will be green when we resume. Let's take the line color and put that as our stroke color. Click resume. It's green, that's exactly what we wanted. And then this chart view, so this geometry reader, I'm just going to cut it. Let's add an extension. Let's do extension down here. Let's call it chart view. And let's make a private var. Let's call this chart view of type SumView. Open the brackets. And in here, let's just paste in our geometry reader. All right, so just to separate out our chart logic. So let's put that in the body here. Let's click resume, make sure it still works. And obviously we don't want our chart view to be the entire height of the screen. So let's give it a explicit frame of maybe a height of 200. We can make this dynamic later if we want, but I think a height of 200 is going to look a little better in our app. All right, and behind the frame, I want to add some grid lines. So it looks like there's grids behind our chart. So let's just call it a background. And in our background, we're going to add a VStack, open the brackets. And we're going to add a divider. So it's going to look like a line behind our chart. And we want to add 3 dividers. So one at the top and the bottom. And to spread them apart, we're just going to add a spacer in between each of them. So we're going to push them to the top and the bottom. And now it looks like we have 3 grid lines on our chart, which was pretty easy to add with just dividers and spacers. Let's make this VStack a variable. So I'm going to cut it, go down to our extension, and we'll say private var chart background, type SumView. Let's paste in our VStack, and up in our background, we can just call chart background. All right, looking good. Hope you guys are with me. All right, the next thing I want to do is add some labels to our y-axis, so we know what the highest y is and the smallest y is, so we can get a rough estimate of where all these data points are. So on top of the chart, let's add an overlay, and on the overlay, we're going to add a VStack just like we just did, and let's add a text. Let's just say hi for a second, and we're going to have one at the top, one in the middle, and one at the bottom. So same thing with 3 of them, and then we're going to put spacers between them just to push them apart. And the overlay can have an alignment, so we'll add a comma alignment, and we'll make it dot leading, so it's pushed to the left side of the chart. And then of course we want to change the text here, so instead of hi, the top one is going to be our max y, so we're going to say max y dot formatted with abbreviations. We're going to do the same thing for the bottom. We'll do min y dot formatted with abbreviations. And for the middle one, we just need to do a little bit of logic. Let's just say let price equals the max y plus the min y divided by 2. And I think we need to put these in parentheses. So this will be the median price, basically, the middle price. And let's put that whole thing in parentheses. And we can call that formatted with abbreviations. So let's cut that and put that inside our text here. We don't need this price. And if that looks like it worked correctly, we got 58, 55, and 52K. All looks good to me. Let's also take this VStack, let's cut it. Let's go down to the extension. And let's create a private var. Let's say chart y axis of type SumView. Paste in our VStack. Let's go back up and add in our chart axis view, chart y axis. Let's put this back on one line. Alright, and below the chart, I just want to add the dates. So we know that this is today's date. And then since it is the spark line in 7D we're getting, 7D stands for 7 days. So the first date is actually just today minus 7 days. So I just want to put the dates underneath the chart. So I went ahead here and looked at the actual data we're getting in our coin model. And I can show you guys, if we look at our, so if we look quickly at our dev.coin, we can see that the date is actually coming in with this custom format from CoinGecko. It's a string, and we need to convert it into a date. And it's a little funky, right? It's not just an exact date that we can convert. So we need to create a custom initializer for our date. We're going to do that in an extension. So I'm going to right click our extensions, create a new file, and it's going to be a Swift file. I'm going to call it date. And I'll also put this file in the resources folder so you guys don't have to actually type this out. But let's create an extension for date, and we'll open the brackets. So in here, let's create a custom init. We'll open the brackets, and we want to init from that date. So if I go back, I'm just going to copy this quickly and go forward. And this is what we want to convert from. So we're going to say, and so this is a string. So let's call this CoinGecko string of type string. And we want to initialize, obviously, a date from this string. So first, let's say let formatter equals date formatter. Then we're going to say formatter dot date format. I'm going to set it equal to, I have it copied and pasted here. It is the YYY for the year, dash MM for the month, dash DD for the days that we can see here, and then T. Then we have the hours, minutes, seconds, and then I think these S's are milliseconds. But basically, this is the format that is coming in, and we need to convert this, obviously, into a date. So we'll say let date equals the formatter dot date from, and we can pass in our CoinGecko string. And this returns us an optional date, so we'll make it, so if we can't get one, we'll just use today's date. And then we'll just call self.init. We'll use the time interval here. So the time interval will be 0 and since the date that we just found. So basically just return us the date. So this is creating a custom initializer that is then calling a regular initializer, but with a specific date. So if we pass this string into this initializer, it should return us the date that we're looking for. All right, so I'm going to go back into our code now. And I'm going to Command Shift K to clean and rebuild. And at the top here, let's say let starting date of type date and let ending date of type date. And in our initializer, let's then set up those dates. So here we'll say ending date. Now the ending date is the most recent date in our data. So if we look at the data that we're getting, our coin dev.coin here, I can see that we actually get this last updated. So I'm going to use this last updated as our last data point. So to get rid of the error message quick, let's just set the ending date equal to date and the starting date equal to date. Just click resume on the canvas, make sure it builds out. All right, now I want to set up the ending date. So we're going to actually, instead of just using this date, this initializer, we're going to open the parentheses and we're going to use the from CoinGecko string that we just set up. So now we can pass in our date string from our CoinGecko data. So we'll call coin.lastUpdated. And this is optional. So if we can't get it, we'll just pass in a blank string. And this will then return us a date. And then the starting date we actually don't get in our data, but we do know that it is 7 days before our ending date. So instead of date, we're just going to set the starting date equal to the ending date dot adding time interval. And here we're just going to multiply 7 days times 24 hours times 60 minutes times 60 seconds. And this is just because time interval is based in seconds, I believe. And we want to go back 7 days, so we'll make it negative. So that will give us our starting date. And now underneath our chart view, we're in a V stack here. Let's then add an H stack, open the parentheses. Let's add 2 texts. Let's just say hi for a second. Let's put 2 of them, and let's add a spacer to push them apart. Let's click or zoom, see what it looks like. Alright, and now I want to convert these dates to strings. And we haven't done this yet in our app, so we also want an extension to convert regular dates to strings. So going back into our date extension, let's say private var short formatter of type date formatter, open the brackets. And in here, let's just say let formatter equals a date formatter. And we'll say formatter dot date style equals short. We'll just return the formatter. We're using this just so that anytime we use this formatter, it will convert our date into a short date. Let's create one more. Let's call it a func as short date string. Open close parentheses, returns a string, and we'll open the brackets. And here we're going to take the current date that we have. So this is an extension of date. And then we're just going to call dot as short date string, and it will convert our date into a string, of course. And let's return the short formatter dot string from self, which is the date that we are inside. All right, so now we can just call as short date string, and it will convert it to a string with the short date format. Let's go back to our app. Click resume on the canvas. All right, let's Command Shift K to clean and rebuild. Make sure we are building here. And then let's just use our new extension. So we'll say starting date dot as short date string. And that looks like it worked. And then I'm going to do the same thing except ending date dot as short date string. And this looks like it's working because our ending date is 3/13, which is today's date, and this is about 7 days later, so this looks like our dates are working perfectly. Alright, I'm going to take these dates, cut them, let's put them down at the bottom. Let's say private var chart date labels of type sum view, open brackets, paste it inside. Should say chart. And then let's put that back on our body up top here. Let's call them labels, sorry. Click resume, make sure it still builds. And I think that does it for our chart, but obviously it doesn't look great, so let's do a little bit of formatting before we leave here. So I just restarted my Xcode because it was not compiling correctly. I assume you guys might have to as well, just a heads up. But our chart, the data is done, but it doesn't look great, so let's format it a little bit. On the V stack, let's give it a font of caption. And let's also give it a .foreground color of color.theme secondary text. So it's the gray text on our labels. That looks a little bit better. And then I want to actually animate this line when it comes onto the screen. So if I go down to the chart view, before I add the stroke, I can call .trim. And if we look at the trim, it goes from 0 to 1. So if I put from 0 to 1, it is the entire chart that we still see on the screen. If I go from 0 to 0.5, we'll see half of the chart. Because it's trimming this shape, so the entire path by basically 50% from 0 to 0.5, which is 50%. If I do 0.25, it'll be 25%, 0.75, it'll be 75%. So if we just animate this 2 number be from 0 all the way up to 1, it will then animate our line. So up at the top here, I'm going to create an @state private var. We'll say percentage of type CG float, and we'll set it equal to 0 to start. And while we're here, I noticed that these are not private, so we can make all of these variables private as well, because we're only going to use them inside this view. Click resume, make sure we still build. Alright, let's take this percentage, put it down to our 1 here. And we're starting at 0, we want to animate up to 1.0. So underneath the foreground color, let's call it .onAppear. Open the brackets, and we are going to, let's call it dispatch queue .main.async after .now plus, let's do 1 second, and then we're going to execute. So when the screen appears, we're going to delay by 1 second, and then we're going to execute this code. And we want the line to animate with animation, and we want it to be, let's do a linear animation so it's the same speed throughout the whole thing. We'll call it .linear with a duration of maybe 3 seconds, and then we'll open the brackets. And we're going to animate the percentage to 1.0. So if I click play on the simulator, if I wait 1 second, it should then animate our line to the ending. And I think that looked good, but I think we can make it look a little better. So let's make the delay, let's do maybe 0.2, so it's a little faster after we start. And maybe a faster animation as well of maybe 2 seconds. Let's see how that looks. I'm going to stop and start the simulator again, see if it looks a little better. I think 2 seconds is a little bit better. And the last thing I want to do here is this line looks a little plain, so I want to add a little bit of shadow behind it just to make it stand out a little bit. So let's go down to our stroke, and behind the stroke let's add a shadow. And let's use the color and radius. So the color, right now it's black. We can see that it's a dirty black. But let's make it the same color as the line. So we'll use the line color. Let's keep it a radius of 10 and X of 0. And let's move it down 10. So we'll do an Y of 10 here. And that looks a little bit better. I want to keep adding more shadows below it, so that it looks like it fades out, but it has like a pretty hefty shadow. So I'm going to actually copy this and then paste it 3 times. So we have a bunch of shadows here. So if we look right now, it's this really thick green shadow because there's 4 on top of each other. But what I'm going to do is change the opacities of each of these. So this one will be 0.5. This one will be a little thinner, so opacity of maybe 0.2. And the final one will do opacity of 0.1. And then we're just going to move them down by 10. So this one will be 10, this one will be 20, this one will be 30, and this one will be 40. Now I'll just give it this nice effect kind of below the line, which I think will look good. So if I stop and run it one more time, we should now get this pretty cool effect. I think that looks pretty cool. Alright, that was a lot of logic for one tiny screen, but I think we can now put this into our app. And the last thing I want to do is just add a little bit of padding so that these numbers aren't all the way at the edge of the screen. So on the chart axis, let's add dot padding of dot horizontal of maybe 4. And I'm going to copy that padding and give it the same padding to our chart labels, just so they're lined up right here. Alright, let's take our chart view and put it into our app. So go into the detail view, and we made this screen in the last video where we have this text at the top. Let's just put in a chart view, and we need to pass in our coin, which of course is our vm.coin. And immediately this should look good. And this looks pretty good, but I actually want the chart to go to the edges of the screen. So let's take the chart view outside this VStack, and let's add another VStack, open the parentheses, and we'll put this VStack inside of that VStack so that all this content still has this padding, but this chart view does not. Let's click resume. And maybe we want to add some padding of dot vertical on this chart. And I think that will look a little bit better. Let's click play. And now we have our cool line going through. All right, and lastly, let's just build this on a simulator and see what it looks like. So let's click play. And hopefully it looks pretty cool. I think it looks good in the light mode, but I think it's gonna look even better in the dark mode. So we load the app, we get our coins, and let's click on ETH. And it's got this cool green line. And I think that looks pretty cool. I'm gonna go to another one. Let's find maybe ADA. This one's green as well. Let's see if we can find one that went negative. This one went negative, so we have this nice red line. Alright guys, that's pretty much it for this video. I know it was a lot of logic for just a small section of our app, but I think this animation and this graph is really going to add a nice user experience to our application. And it looks really professional, honestly. Like, this looks like it's a smooth animation. We have these really cool colors coming through, and it's even changing colors whether or not it's positive or negative. So overall, I really like the design of this graph. If you are making a graph-based app, you obviously could do a lot more customization here, maybe to add more grid lines or enable the user to actually be able to like click and hold or touch points on this graph to see what the current prices are. But for our purposes, to just hack together this graph pretty quick, I think it adds a lot to our app. I hope you guys are excited about it. And we are almost done with our app, so hope you guys are getting excited. Thank you for watching. As always, I'm Nick, this is SwiftUI Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.